Welcome back to Trending in Education. Dan Strafford, Michael Palmer, Brandon Jones along with you. And on this week's episode, we're talking about the myth that we only use 10% of our brain. We've talked about myths in the past. We enjoy debunking them, and that's what we'll be doing here today. Mike, are you ready to debunk some mythology here on today's episode?
I am, and I've specifically activated 12% of my brain for this show. So you're yes. So like you're gonna get some higher quality insights from me. I don't want to go up too high because then I run a little hot, and then I may wind up passing out. But right now I'm operating in the 11 to 13% zone.
Now, Brandon, you've seen Mike when he operates a virtual memory too high, so I don't want to see that happen today. But
I know the smoke starts coming out of his ears, his eyes roll back in his head. Yeah, well, I'm glad you're bringing it.
Yeah,
there's a lot. I think there's going to be we talked about percents. You brought percents in your opening comment.
I did.
There's going to be a lot of them.
A lot of math. So
hey, if you like percents,
yeah,
this is the episode for you.
Maybe get out your scratch pad and your pencil, because I know many of our listeners. It's a comment we've heard from you.
Yeah,
those of you who like listening with a scratch pad and some pencils.
It's like 105% of our audience.
Most of our audience.
Yeah.
But get ready. There's some math coming.
Warning. Let's basically define it first, right, Mike? The myth has been relevant in pop culture and even in science since late 1800s, right? Where a study at Harvard sort of begat this entire conversation. If you could, some background here on the who's and the whys and how it's still to this day something many adults and many teachers even believe.
Yeah, so roughly 65% of Americans, I believe that we use only 10% of our brains.
Is it 10? Do you think the opposite is true? Is it 10% of Americans think we use 65% of our brains?
That's interesting.
Yes, well,
I hadn't really thought about that. That's math.
Yeah.
But I don't believe that's the case. But hey, they're all myths. So maybe you're starting a new myth.
I might be.
Yeah.
Go tell a friend.
Go tell a friend. But the idea that we only use 10% and that roughly 90% of our brains are like dormant, just there, just kind of hanging out, is in fact false. If you think about the percentage as the percent that is used over like a typical time period. So in any given day, we're all using more than 10% of our brains. So that's actually true. We're using more than 10%. What is interesting, related point though, is that at any given point in time, we're only using between 1 and 16% of our brains. So our brains are typically dark, and then we're only using limited parts of our brains at any point in time. So, if you're using 100% of your brain, the only time that really happens is during an epileptic seizure. So in many ways, what makes our cognitive functioning higher level is the fact that we're only using limited parts of our brain activity at any point in time. So I thought that was interesting. And then the actual genesis of the myth itself is a bunch of Harvard cats. So William James, the arguably the father of modern psychology, who was really the leading psychologist, kind of founded the field out of Harvard in the late 1800s. He got to know this other guy, Boris Sidis, who had a son named William James Sidis. And the kid was such a prodigy that William James named or basically described this child as an example of the fact that we all use just a scintilla of our full cognitive capacity. And there's a lot of interesting stuff in terms of the history. As I believe you're familiar with Harvard University in some capacity.
I've heard of it. Yes.
Yeah.
What I was going to say, so the psychology building at Harvard is named William James Hall.
Uh-huh.
And when I was a little short on cash, I did a bunch of psychology experiments there.
Really?
As a subject.
Yeah.
For maybe 3 months before graduating and then after graduating. Like that was my sole source of income. So I would leave one psych experiment and go right back to the next one.
Do you go back and look for experiments that you were cited in?
I think it was all anonymous. But I always wondered what became of it, because then you get into thinking, like, are they really measuring the thing that they're testing you on, or some other thing that they're using the thing that they're testing on as a distraction?
Who knows?
Who knows? But I like all the Harvard action in this. It's happy making. But William James, I think this is just a crazy lot of James stuff going on. So there's William James, brother of Henry James, the author, he's the father of this myth, because he's citing the extraordinary capabilities of his godson, who is named after him, who also is at Harvard, or eventually gets to Harvard when he's 11. That's just all sorts of, and from this, all we got was something that's not right.
Right.
Thanks, William James.
Although he never said 10%, which is why, like,
just a scintilla.
Well, I might have even made up scintilla as
that's not a direct quote.
Not a direct quote. I was paraphrasing.
Do we know where the 10% came from?
I think it came afterwards, right?
Yeah. Oh, so over time, he basically said he's not using. We're not using all of our brains. He's using more of his brain than we are.
Yeah.
And that's like, attaboy. That's my godson.
Yeah, right. That's a little bit of attaboy.
Yeah.
And then it does say, I am quoting from Wikipedia here just to read it directly. American writer Lowell Thomas summarized this idea in a foreword to Dale Carnegie's How to Win Friends and Influence People by adding a falsely precise percentage. Professor William James of Harvard used to say that the average man develops only 10% of his latent mental ability.
Mm-hmm.
So that was falsely attributed to William James?
Yes, sir.
Huh.
And it's also like, if you add a percent to anything, it sounds scientific.
This is a myth wrapped up in a percentage, wrapped up in bacon. I like this. This is exciting.
It is.
But you were saying, Mike, this myth is kind of debunked.
Yes. It's mostly debunked. Like, it depends on how you define the percent, right? So, like, if you're going to say the percentage of our brains that are active at any given point in time is 10%-ish.
Yeah.
That's pretty accurate.
Right.
Because we use between 1 and 16% at any given point in time.
This doesn't sound like debunking.
Yeah, that's like bunking.
That's bunking.
Yeah. But the part that's bunk is that
different bunk.
Yeah.
Top
is
bunk.
that we only use 10% of our brains,
Right.
and then the rest of our brains are just almost like spare tires. And like, and it's not.
You should see my brains.
But evolution doesn't work that way. We're like actually allowing that much dead weight to be, kicking around in our noggins is biologically inefficient. So instead, you're using different aspects of your brain at all points in time. It does take us back to our old friend of the show.
Old friend.
Phineas Gage.
Yes.
Right? So Phineas Gage, railroad spike to the brain. For those of you who haven't heard Brandon's
I've waxed poetic on Phineas Gage.
You've waxed some
sure have.
poetry about one Phineas Gage who became ornery. Ornery after being impaled through his head with a railroad spike.
As you do.
Yeah. And, your take, which is now mine, is like, wouldn't you be?
Right. Yeah. The scientific community came around Phineas Gage and said, oh, I realized what must have happened was that his personality changed as a result of this lobal damage.
Yeah.
Or maybe it was just that he was ornery after getting a railroad spike through the head.
Railroad spike through your brain.
It was like in one ear and out the other, and not a metaphor.
It was in one chin and out the top of your head. Which
that's
is
so bad. That seems.
Maybe it came in through his face. I don't know. But however it happened, it was tough. But the interesting thing was at the time, scientists didn't understand what the cerebral cortex, the prefrontal cortex, was used for, and a lot of the neurology research that over the years has been, well, if you damage this part of the brain, people can't do this other thing. So therefore, that part of the brain is attributable to people doing this other thing.
Right.
What they found over time was that you could mess with all parts of your gray matter, your cerebrum, and people were pretty okay due to the lovely quality we call neuroplasticity. So since our brains are flexible and can adapt to impairment by, physical like lesioning or ablations to your brain, a lot of ablating of mouse brains in psychology labs, in addition to to talking to Brandon, that's also happening.
Yeah,
Hopefully there was no ablation in your research.
There may have been.
Yeah.
There's like a period that's hard for me to remember from some of those
It
experiments.
may have blotted it out.
This is off topic a little bit,
Ah.
but I was watching a nature show
Mhm.
from the program Nature
Yes.
with my daughter this weekend from our last episode on screen time. This was also, I hope, an appropriate use of screen.
Yeah.
And we were watching about squirrels, the marvelous world of squirrels. And the thing that's relevant here is that the squirrel's brain, first of all, squirrels, incredible.
Yeah.
They can remember like the location they think from this experiment that's been done of like 8,000 individual nuts that they've buried.
I've heard of squirrels that they got to get a nut.
Yeah, it's true.
Yeah.
But the thing that is interesting here is that the squirrels' brains actually grow in size during the winter.
Okay.
That their brain actually expands in its capacity to expand in its capacity.
Wow.
Yeah, wacky.
Yeah.
So I mean, I think that the 10% of our brains,
Yeah.
I think we're using like 100% of a squirrel's brain.
Well, yeah.
But it's super misleading because I think that in the 65%, I imagine there's a big percentage of those people who don't quite get how the brain is constructed.
Right.
Right. And so they're thinking, why wouldn't we just use 100%? And I guess when we do use 100% of our brain capacity at a given time, that's bad news.
Right.
Because then we have bad outcomes.
Yeah. Because the brain is like brain activity, and there's this idea of sparse coding that is related where like it's not so much which parts of the brain are active, it's more how activity moves through the brain. And a lot of that is the brain's mostly dark most of the time, and then there's just sort of little patterns of activity, and then those are constantly sort of moving through the different circuitry of the brain. And like those patterns are where like cognitive and experiential perceptual activity happens. So like if your brain were to light up 100% at one point in time, in some ways you'd be passing less information than by like the patternicity of different areas, the majority of it being dark and different sort of flaring of activity happens. By the way, that lets me talk about functional MRIs and positron emissions tests, both of which are really freaking cool. So that's like the mapping of the brain, and you can see like the different like patterns of activity. Plus, it has positrons in it.
It's pretty good.
That's cool stuff. Yeah. And like that's where a lot of this research is heading, and it's all showing. It's like by the end of the day, your brain has like sort of competed in a mental decathlon, but at any given point in time, there's only really one or few events.
It's a good analogy.
Thank
How
you.
about this?
Yeah.
Brain research.
Yeah.
It's heady stuff. That might be the last thing other than this thing that I say.
Drop that, Mike?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it's interesting though, around the usage. I wonder about we talked about mental athletes.
Yeah.
And memory palaces and different memory techniques. I wonder if there is those mental athletes are actually, or William James Citus,
Mm-hmm.
if they were actually actively using a higher percentage of their brain.
Yes.
Yes, you also wonder, or yes, you believe that they were.
I think yes. This is an interesting area.
Okay, good, got it. Okay,
Yeah.
I was. You may also know.
Yeah.
But like because I do think that it's silly to think we should be using 100% of our brain,
Right.
At any given time.
Right.
It's interesting to think about if purposeful use of how your brain is wired, built, etc., can yield you better outcomes in whatever it is that you're trying to pursue, mental, athletics, or whatnot. If that, I think using the same percentage scale as maybe gets us down into this myth hole, but is better, right? Like if you're actually using some more capacity and that's delivering you better outcomes, I think that's interesting.
100%.
There it is.
You see what I did?
I sure did.
Yeah. But the point why I said yes was like I liked where you were going with that too, because like if you're talking about intelligence and like relative intelligence and like a savant who is maxing out her intelligence in, say, music, is likely not at 100% everywhere. But it also gets to the notion of G. It's just the G thing, really, which is generalized intelligence, which is where artificial intelligence is having a harder time keeping up with generalized human intelligence. And I think that was more the context that that the original WJ,
the OG.
William James, his OG was about G, I think, to a certain extent, which is like, gee, this kid's smart. How does my namesake, my godson, how does he get into Harvard at 9 and then attend at 11 when it took me until I was like 17 or however old, William James was by the time he went there? So it is sort of that aspirational notion of intelligence and, sort of ranking percentiles, which is a big part of standardized testing and a lot of that kind of stuff. I think there's more truth to that understanding of this than there is to actual brain usage.
Right.
Because even like, who knows whether, in some ways the sparse coding and the way the brain works, maybe it's that really, really intelligent folk are shutting down all brain activity except for the most essential cognitive functions. And obviously, like the ability to breathe.
Of course, yeah.
Like
Those
bloodstream and all that.
Those are helpful.
But I thought I liked where you're going just in terms of contrasting brain activity and intelligence, and the idea that many of us have untapped intellectual capabilities that could be further realized with help. That's true.
Yeah.
How much and how to turn it into a percent gets a little fuzzy.
Yeah, I think that the one thing that, another thing that I was thinking about though is optimization on certain dimensions may yield atrophy in other dimensions. So, for William James Sidis, the godson, I read in a line somewhere that he was known first for his precocity.
Yes.
And then soon thereafter for his eccentricity.
Sure.
He had to go live in the wilderness. I mean, he was asserting that was the best choice.
Yeah.
But he did get into Harvard at 11 and, thought he could have been there at 9 and was lecturing to graduate students at age 12. And, so his father, Boris, and his godfather had done good work to make him a real savant, but it did hinder him, I think, in some other ways. And so, I think about even when you're using all of your capacity on one dimension, that's a choice. It's a choice to not be sending little Billy William James Sidis out to like play wall ball, as we've talked about before.
Right.
I don't know if they had wall ball back in 1890s or whatever.
Right,
but,
right.
It's optimizing along one dimension, which may be not optimal overall.
Yeah, totally ties to social emotional learning and the othering of the savant, the nerd as outcast is all very much part of popular culture, in part because it's real. But it is interesting to understand how, Billy Sidis might be founding a tech company if he were growing up today, and he would have the wherewithal of a couple of Harvard alums to kind of help him get started. It's also interesting, just to harken back to last week, how much screen time makes sense versus sending the savant out into the woods where free from all those corrupting influences.
Not free from all those squirrels.
Including other humans. I got another really quick percentage point to make. The percent of the brain. The brain is 2% of our biomass and consumes 20% of our energy.
What a hog.
Big hog. And you know what kind of food the brain loves? Fatty food and carbs. So the brain also loves junk food. So like if it were up to the brain, we would just be like mainlining Twinkies and Doritos and soft
Why
drinks.
didn't I know this growing up?
I
This
don't
should have
know.
been my excuse all
I-
along.
Come on,
I
Mom.
lived the best brain life then. I think we may have had the Billy Sidis chair instead of the Elon Musk chair. It might have been the Billy Sidis
That's
chair.
true.
Yeah.
I do want to, as we close, and Mike Brennan, if you have a take on this, love to hear it. We did discuss the idea of Lucy, the movie, Limitless, another movie, the idea that this myth has perpetuated in science fiction. I think mostly, Mike, it's almost aspirational, right? We all want to believe we can do more with our brains, and we all want to believe there is some sort of ability to control things with our mind and create things that way because it's this science fiction notion. Do you see it that way? And do you see that as sort of that persistent storytelling that we all want to be able to say, oh yeah, I use 15% of my brain, or I use 20% of my brain because I'm advanced, or I took this pill, or whatever it might be?
That's a good question. Now I'm up at about 13% of my brain based on that question. I'm running a little hot. I might need some pop soda to kind of feed my brain. But I think it is interesting when you start. One thing we talked a lot about is neuroprosthetics and performance enhancing anything. Humans constantly seek that out, and we definitely seeking it out. We're seeking it out for a cognitive edge all the time. And like whether that's requiring a pill or a kind of cognitive hack or even some sort of surgery or different diet, everybody's looking for an edge, and we're all looking to improve ourselves. So it is in many ways a precursor to growth mindset in that, you're only using 10% of your brain. Get after it now. You got 90% of action to be accessed if you could just open it up. And then interestingly, just the narratives around, is that through a pill? Is that through some sort of genetic engineering? Is that through some sort of prosthetic of sorts? I think that stuff's all fascinating.
And that'll do it for this episode. More to come on this topic in the future. Special thanks, as always, Brandon, Mike. Great content from them. Find us on Twitter. Find us on Facebook at Trending in Ed. And, of course, trendingineducation.com. Till next time, you've been listening to Trending in Education.